The transport pod had been sitting in the hallway for 6 hours when Elias Ward finally accepted that it wasn't going to disappear on its own. It squatted just outside his apartment door like a sealed coffin wrapped in dull government gray, humming softly as if breathing. The light strip along its side pulsed at a steady interval, status normal, contents stable, delivery complete. That alone made Elias uneasy. Nothing that came from the Confederation ever arrived labeled complete and actually meant it. He stood barefoot on the cold composite floor of apartment 7H, Veterans Residential Block C, level 19 of the Helix Arcology, staring at the pod with the kind of caution that didn't fade after the war. It calcified. 3 years on Karin's reach had trained his instincts to assume that anything unattended was either about to explode or was bait. Probably both. The door chime sounded again. "Captain Ward," came a voice from the corridor speaker. "Delivery confirmation required." Elias opened the door halfway, keeping his body behind the reinforced frame. A Centauri woman stood there with a data pad tucked under her arm, her blue-tinged skin dull under the arcology lights. One eye lagged half a second behind the other, cheap neural implant. "Logistics division." "Sign here," she said, already sounding tired of the interaction. Elias glanced past her at the pod. "What is it?" She flicked her gaze to the manifest. "Companion allocation, exotic imports program." "That's a mistake," Elias said immediately. She sighed. "I don't choose them, I just deliver." He stared at the pod again. He'd been expecting something manageable, something explainable. A bioengineered hound, maybe. One of those military surplus therapy units designed to detect nightmares and apply pressure when your heart rate spiked. Hell, he would have taken a talking avian that insulted him in 3 languages. Something that didn't hum like it was keeping secrets. "This thing is big," he said. "Within regulation limits," she replied. "Temperature-controlled, sedated, non-hostile." Non-hostile was never the word that mattered. Elias took the pad. His thumb hovered over the biometric seal. Once he signed, it became his responsibility. That was how the Confederation worked, ownership disguised as care. "You sure this isn't supposed to go to a research facility?" he asked. She didn't meet his eyes. "Captain, if you want to dispute it, file Form 7A through Veteran Services. Processing time is currently 4 to 6 standard weeks." 4 to 6 weeks. He exhaled through his nose and pressed his thumb down. The pad chirped. "Have a good day," she said, already turning away. The corridor doors slid shut, leaving Elias alone with the pod and the low mechanical hum of the arcology's lungs. He dragged it inside. The pod was heavier than expected, servo-assist handles compensating but not enough to hide the mass. Whatever, or whoever, was inside wasn't small. It scraped against the doorframe before finally clearing, settling in the center of his living space. 12 square meters. Fold-down bunk. Synth unit that only worked reliably on alternating days. One narrow window offering a spectacular view of another building 3 meters away. Home. The release mechanism was impossible to miss. Red panel, clear warning icons, authorized recipient only. "Fantastic," Elias muttered. He pressed it. The pod hissed as seams unfolded. Cold vapor spilled out, scentless and clean. The front panel lowered, forming a ramp. Something inside moved. Elias froze. She was curled against the inner wall of the containment unit, knees pulled to her chest, arms locked tight around herself as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Her clothing, if it could be called that, was torn and threadbare, strips of dark fabric clinging to pale skin that seemed almost luminous in the dim light. Dark hair spilled over her face in tangled waves. And her ears. They rose long and tapered from the sides of her head, pressed flat against her skull like a frightened animal S. As Elias watched, they twitched, tracking him. His breath caught. "Hey," he said quietly because his brain had completely failed to provide a better option. She lifted her head. Her eyes were violet, not reflective, not augmented. They glowed faintly on their own. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, Two survivors from very different wars trapped by the same bureaucracy. Then she opened her mouth. He saw the teeth, elongated canines, sharp, predatory. Elias took one slow step back. "Okay," he said carefully. "Okay, you're definitely not the dog." She didn't move, didn't speak, but her body was coiled tight, every muscle braced, eyes locked on his throat like she was starving and terrified of herself for noticing. Years of training snapped into place. She's scared. Scared things are dangerous. Give space. Don't corner. He raised his hands, palms out. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I promise." Her ears flicked forward, just slightly. Not trust, but attention. And that was enough to tell Elias war. Elias didn't sleep that night. Not really. He lay on his bunk with his boots still on, staring at the ceiling panel where a hairline crack traced a shape vaguely like a constellation he didn't recognize. The arcology hummed around him, air cycling, transit tubes whispering somewhere deep in the structure, distant voices bleeding through thin walls. Normal sounds, civilian sounds. Inside his apartment, silence pressed back. She hadn't moved from the pod. Every few minutes he felt it before he heard it, the faint shift of weight, the whisper of fabric, the subtle scrape of claws against composite plating. Not aggressive, careful, like someone terrified of being noticed. Elias rolled onto his side and spoke without turning his head. "There's a blanket in the storage compartment under the bunk," he said evenly. "Emergency issue. Thermal adaptive. I'm not going to look if you want to grab it." No response. He waited, counted breaths the way the medics had taught him when panic threatened to spiral. At 37, there was movement. The pod's ramp creaked softly. Elias kept his gaze fixed on the wall as a pale hand emerged from the shadows. Long fingers, nails darker than human, curved just slightly. They hesitated, then withdrew. A minute later, the blanket disappeared into the pod. Good. Progress. Morning came in artificial increments. The lighting system brightened by degrees, simulating dawn no one in the helix ever actually saw. Elias rose slowly, stretching muscles that still remembered armor and recoil. He moved deliberately, making noise on purpose, cup against counter, synth unit powering up, water running. "I'm making food," he said, voice neutral. "If you're hungry, it's not great, but it's edible." The synth unit beeped in protest before producing something that vaguely resembled protein paste and eggs. He ate standing up, eyes on the window. Outside, the neighboring arcology block glowed with internal light, silhouettes of lives stacked on top of one another. A Centauri couple argued on a balcony. Somewhere above, music pulsed, too loud, too cheerful. Behind him, a sound, soft, almost nothing. "I won't turn around," Elias said, "just so you know." Silence stretched, then barely audible. "Not pet." The words were rough, like they'd been dragged up from disuse. Her accent bent the consonants, softened them. Elias swallowed. "No," he said carefully, "definitely not." Another pause, then why? He turned slowly this time. She stood just beyond the pod, wrapped tightly in the emergency blanket like armor. Up close, she was smaller than he'd expected, slight, all sharp lines and tension. Her ears were no longer pressed flat, but they weren't relaxed either. Her eyes tracked every movement, glowing faintly in the half-light. "Why am I here?" she clarified. "Because," Elias said, choosing honesty over comfort, "someone in the Confederation filed the wrong paperwork." Her expression didn't change. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got," he replied. "I was supposed to receive a companion animal. You were misallocated." Something flickered across her face then, understanding laced with something darker. "Property," she said quietly. "No," Elias said immediately. "A person, at least that's how I see it." Her eyes searched his face as if looking for the lie. "What is your name?" he asked. Another long pause. "Sira," she said at last. "Of Velkara." Elias nodded. "I'm Elias. You're safe here, Sira. No one's coming to take you away today." That was when the comm unit chimed. They both flinched. Elias cursed under his breath and crossed the room, tapping the display. The Confederation seal glowed cheerfully. Veteran Services automated response. Of course. He angled the screen so she could see. I'm going to try to fix this. Fair warning, this may take a while and it will be deeply irritating. The system guided him through menus with relentless politeness. Companion allocation, exotic imports, incorrect delivery. Each option branched into more options, each recorded voice more unhelpful than the last. Processing time, 4 to 6 standard weeks. Elias laughed once, sharp and humorless. You hear that? Apparently we're stuck with each other for at least a month. Sira's ears twitched. Stuck, she repeated. Temporarily, he said. And only if you want to be here. That door works both ways. She looked at the door as if it might bite her. Outside, sirens wailed briefly, then faded. Leaving without clearance is dangerous, she said. For my kind. Elias' jaw tightened. Yeah, I'm starting to get that impression. He ended the call and tossed the comm unit onto the bunk. Well, he said, forcing a lighter tone, until the galaxy sorts itself out, you're welcome to use the space. Food's yours if you want it, bathrooms through there, one rule. Her eyes lifted. By the third day, Elias had learned the sound of Sira moving through his apartment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't careless. It was the kind of quiet that came from someone who'd learned, painfully, that being unnoticed was safer than being seen. She moved when she thought he was asleep. He'd wake in the artificial pre-dawn to find small changes he couldn't explain at first. His jacket folded instead of draped over the chair. The synth unit wiped down. His boots scuffed, scarred things that had crossed more battlefields than most officers, lined neatly by the door. Once, he found his ration packs organized by expiration date. That one unsettled him more than the teeth. He didn't comment on it, pretended not to notice. If she needed purpose, he wasn't going to take it from her. On the fourth morning, he found her standing by the window. She'd ventured farther into the room now, though she still kept her back close to solid surfaces. The emergency blanket was gone, replaced by one of his spare shirts. It hung loose on her frame, the fabric swallowing her shoulders, sleeves falling past her hands. She noticed him watching and stiffened. Sorry, Elias said immediately. Didn't mean to startle you. Her ears flicked, adjusting. You make loud thoughts, she said. He blinked. That's a new one. She hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward her head. Emotions. Humans do not hide them well. Elias snorted despite himself. You should have seen me before the war. That earned him a confused look. He grabbed a nutrient bar and tossed it gently onto the counter between them. I don't know what your biology needs, but I'm guessing you haven't eaten since you got here. Her gaze lingered on the bar, then lifted to his neck. Elias felt it then, the weight of it. Not hunger exactly, restraint. I don't eat that, she said quietly. He studied her more carefully now, the pallor of her skin, the way her eyes tracked movement, the tension coiled just beneath the surface. What do you eat? He asked. She looked away. Nothing, she said, not here. That set off every warning bell he had left. Elias waited until she met his eyes again. Sira, when was the last time you ate? Her jaw tightened. Before the transport, she admitted. 7 cycles ago. 7 days. Okay, he said slowly. That's a problem. Her ears flattened instantly. I won't, she said quickly. I won't hurt you. I know, Elias replied. And I'm not accusing you of anything, but starving yourself isn't a solution either. She wrapped her arms around herself, shoulders curling inward. My kind is classified as parasitic. Feeding is regulated. Elias' stomach dropped. Feeding on what? She didn't answer. He didn't push, not yet. But once she retreated back toward the bathroom, he grabbed his jacket and comm unit. He needed answers. The lower levels of the helix were a different world. Lights dimmer. Regulations looser. People who didn't ask questions unless they came with credits attached. The shop was wedged between a noodle vendor and a Neuralink repair booth, its sign flickering. Exotic solutions, discretion guaranteed. The man behind the counter looked human, which somehow made him more unsettling. Let me guess, the dealer said after listening to Elias' story. Confederation mix-up. She hasn't eaten in a week, Elias said flatly. The dealer raised a brow. Do you know what Velcurins are? I'm about to, Elias replied. The dealer unlocked a refrigerated cabinet and pulled out a dark container. Hemophagic species, he said. Blood-based nutrition. The word landed like a punch. Elias stared at the container, then at the dealer. You're telling me she's vampire if you want the folklore term, the man shrugged. Though they'd hate that. Whole civilization built around sustainable feeding. Blood banks, consent protocols, very ethical. Elias thought of Sira's restraint, her distance, the way she'd looked at his throat and turned away. How much? He asked. 200 credits, synthetic, legal, barely. Elias paid without hesitation. On the walk back, the city felt different. Every crowd too close. Every official symbol a threat. When he opened his door, Sira was sitting on the floor by the window. Her eyes locked onto the container immediately. This is for you, Elias said, setting it down and stepping back. I'm going to give you privacy. She stared at it like it might vanish. It costs you, she said. Yeah, he replied. So does rent. He left the apartment for 20 minutes, heart pounding harder than it ever had in combat. When he returned, the container was empty. Sira stood straighter now. Color had returned to her skin. Her eyes were clearer, brighter. Better, he asked. She nodded. You should have been afraid. I was, Elias admitted. I just decided not to let that make the choice for me. She studied him for a long moment. You see me, she said finally, not as a mistake. Yeah, he said. Turns out you're really bad at being invisible. Something like a... The knock came on a Tuesday. Elias noticed because Tuesdays were the only days the synth unit reliably produced something resembling coffee, and he'd been looking forward to it since waking up. The cup was halfway to his mouth when the chime echoed through the apartment, sharp, official, and completely unwelcome. Sira froze. She stood near the window, one hand resting on the frame, her body instantly taut. Her ears flattened against her skull, every line of her posture screaming recognition. Don't move, Elias murmured, setting the cup down slowly. The chime sounded again. Captain Elias Ward, a voice called through the door speaker. Confederation Alien Affairs, we need to speak with you. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. So much for coffee. He stepped between Sira and the door without thinking. Years of habit. Years of putting himself where the threat would land first. One moment, he called back, forcing his voice into something calm and civilian. He glanced over his shoulder. How many? 2, Sira whispered. At the door more nearby. Of course there were. Elias opened the door just enough to block the frame with his body. 2 agents stood in the corridor, uniforms pressed, expressions carved from protocol. One held a data pad already glowing with legal language. The other scanned the interior with eyes that missed nothing. Captain Ward, the taller one said, we have documentation regarding an improper companion allocation. Do you know what time it is? Elias asked. The agent blinked. Sir. 700, Elias said flatly, which is uncivilized. This is a mandatory correction. The agent continued, unfazed. We are authorized to retrieve the Velcurin entity, currently housed in this unit, for relocation and evaluation. Entity? Elias felt something cold settle behind his ribs. She has a name, he said, and she's not going anywhere. The second agent's hand drifted toward his belt. Unauthorized harboring of a classified species is a federal violation, he said. We can do this the easy way or the difficult way. Behind Elias, Sierra's voice cut through the tension, clear, steady. Elias. He didn't turn. Window, she said. I can. No, he snapped softly. Not yet. He looked back at the agents, a tired smile touching his mouth. You know what I learned during the war? Elias said. That administrative law is just violence with better paperwork. The taller agent's jaw tightened. Captain Ward, this is not a combat situation. Funny, Elias replied. Feels familiar. The shorter agent reached for his weapon. That was the moment Elias made the decision. Run, he said, not raising his voice. Now. What? Sira breathed. The window, fire escape, go. I won't leave you. What? You will, Elias said sharply. Because I didn't survive 3 years of hell just to hand you over to someone who thinks people are inventory. For one terrible second she hesitated. Then the window slid open. Air rushed in. Metal scraped, and she was gone. The agents surged forward. Elias let them. They searched the apartment with scanners and sharp questions tearing through his already minimal belongings. The bathroom, the pod, the storage compartments, nothing. Finally, the taller agent shut off his scanner with a hiss of irritation. "We'll be back," he said, "with a warrant." "Bring coffee," Elias replied, "the good kind." The door slammed shut. Elias counted to 60. Then he grabbed his jacket and went out the window. The fire escape led downward into the helix's forgotten veins, maintenance corridors, half-lit platforms, places where cameras broke and never got fixed. Elias moved fast, guided by maps he'd built over weeks of quiet observation. He found Sira 2 levels down, crouched behind an air circulation unit that roared loud enough to swallow sound. "That was stupid," she said when she saw him. "Yeah," Elias replied, dropping beside her. "I'm very good at that." They moved together through the lower levels, past markets that sold illegal tech and spices, past people who looked away by choice. At last they reached the garden. It bloomed under artificial suns, green and alive in a space the Confederation had written off as unusable. Veterans, refugees, people who didn't fit cleanly into forms. A woman with a cybernetic arm looked up from a hydroponic rack and grinned. "Elias," she said, "you're early." "Change of plans," he replied. "Need a place to disappear." She followed his gaze to Sira and nodded once. "Then you're in the right place." As Sira stepped into the garden, something in her shifted. Her shoulders lowered, her ears lifted. For the first time since the pod had opened, she looked like she could breathe. Elias watched her take it in, this imperfect, defiant pocket of safety, and knew with absolute clarity they weren't going back. The garden never truly slept. Even when the artificial suns dimmed to their lowest setting, there was always movement, hands adjusting nutrient lines, quiet conversations drifting between planters, the soft hum of life being stubborn in a place designed to forget it existed. Elias sat on the edge of a raised bed filled with broad-leafed greens, watching Sira from a distance. She moved differently here, not cautious exactly, still alert, still aware of every sound, but no longer folded inward. A Martian engineer had handed her a cup of real tea, steam curling up between them, and Sira had accepted it with a careful nod. 2 human kids sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, listening with wide eyes as she spoke softly in a language that flowed like water over stone. She was smiling, actually smiling, fangs visible. No one flinched. A woman dropped down beside Elias, metal arm whirring quietly as it compensated for the movement. Tor's former unit commander, current unofficial backbone of half the lower levels. "You brought trouble," she said mildly. "Yeah," Elias replied. "It follows me." Torres took a sip of her coffee, real coffee. He hadn't realized how much he missed it until that moment. Confederation doesn't like losing assets. "She's not an asset." Torres snorted. "You think they care about the difference?" Elias watched as Sira laughed at something one of the kids said, her ears lifting high before folding back in embarrassment. "They will if enough people remind them." "That's optimistic." "I'm a veteran," he said. "Optimism is rebellion." Tor studied him for a long moment. "You planning to stay?" Elias didn't answer right away. His old apartment was already compromised. His name was probably flagged. His record, decorated, obedient, inconvenient, was now a liability. He looked at the garden again, at people who'd been broken and were quietly rebuilding themselves anyway. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." Tors nodded once. "Then we'll make space." Later, when the lights shifted to night mode and artificial stars appeared above the arcology ceiling, Elias found Sira on the upper platform overlooking the gardens. She stood with her hands on the railing, staring up as if the fake sky might tell her something true. "They will come again," she said without turning. "Probably," Elias replied, joining her. "They're not great at letting go." "But I put you in danger." He leaned his elbows on the rail. "You didn't put me anywhere, I walked." She studied him from the corner of her eye. "Why?" Elias thought of trenches filled with ice, of orders that had never made sense until it was too late, of friends who'd followed anyway. "Because someone once told me I was expendable," he said quietly. "I didn't believe them. Figured I shouldn't start believing it about other people." Sira was silent for a long time. "On Velkara," she said slowly, "feeding is never taken without consent. We share blood in banks, communities. When the Confederation arrived, they called us monsters. They broke our systems first, said it was for public safety." Elias closed his eyes briefly. "They're very good at that. I thought when they sent me to you," her voice faltered. "I thought I was being punished or collected." She turned to face him fully now. "You treated me like a person." Elias met her gaze. "That shouldn't be special." "But it is," she said. Their hands brushed on the railing, neither pulled away. Below them, the garden hummed with quiet life, people finding reasons to stay, to care, to exist outside the lines drawn for them. Above them, artificial stars shone just brightly enough to be convincing. And for the first time since the pod had opened, Elias felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not relief, not victory, belonging. The Confederation returned 3 days later, not with threats, with paperwork. The garden's early warning system wasn't sophisticated, no weapons, no alarms that screamed danger, but it didn't need to be. People who lived in the margins learned to recognize patterns, and the sudden stillness at the market entrance was pattern enough. Tours found Elias near the water recyclers. "They're here," she said. "For this time. Legal division." Elias wiped his hands on his jacket and exhaled slowly. "That's worse." "They're not armed," Torres added. "At least not visibly." "That's never the part that worries me." They met the agents at the threshold where the garden bled into unfinished concrete and exposed wiring. The lights were harsher there, less forgiving. 4 figures in clean uniforms stood waiting, data pads already active, expressions calm in the way that only people backed by systems could afford. "Captain Elias Ward," the lead agent said, "you are currently in violation of Confederation Statute 44C regarding unauthorized relocation of classified non-citizen entities." Elias folded his arms. "She has a name." The agent inclined his head slightly, as if humoring a child. "The Velkaran individual designated." "Sira," Elias cut in. A flicker of irritation crossed the agent's face before it vanished again. "Sira," he repeated, "is subject to mandatory review and relocation under the Alien Safety and Preservation Act." "Preservation," Torres muttered. "That's generous." The agent ignored her. "Captain Ward, your military record is exemplary. Continued noncompliance will complicate matters unnecessarily." "That sounds like a threat," Elias said. "It's a warning." Behind them, Sira stepped forward. The garden went quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every movement slowed. She stood tall now, ears lifted, eyes steady. Not hiding, not cowering. "I will speak," she said calmly. The agents turned, surprised. "I am Velkoran," Sira continued. "I am sapient, self-governing, and capable of consent. I was not informed of my relocation. I did not agree to containment. Under your own interspecies accords, that constitutes unlawful displacement." The lead agent frowned. "Those accords were suspended pending." "Pending fear," Sira said, "not evidence." Elias felt something fierce bloom in his chest. "You call us dangerous," she went on, "yet you dismantled our food systems, scattered our people, and then labeled the resulting desperation as proof of your claims." The garden listened. Even the agents did. "You do not preserve what you cage," Sira finished. "You only make it easier to forget." Silence stretched. Finally, the agent cleared his throat. "These matters are not decided here." No, Elias said. They're decided in offices far away by people who have never met her. He stepped forward, standing beside Sira. You want to classify someone, he continued. Try classifying the soldiers you break and discard. Try classifying the refugees you create and then call unstable. Torres smiled faintly. The agent's jaw tightened. Captain Ward, this path will have consequences. Elias shrugged. So did the last one. The agents conferred quietly, then the lead one deactivated his pad. We will escalate this, he said. Expect further contact. We always do, Elias replied. They left without another word. Only when they were gone did the garden breathe again. Sierra's shoulders sagged slightly. You didn't have to do that, she said to Elias. Yeah, he replied. I did. That night they sat together beneath the artificial stars, closer than before. Not touching, but aware. You spoke like a leader, Elias said. Sira shook her head. I spoke like someone who is tired of being quiet. Elias smiled. That's usually how it starts. Above them, the lights shifted, stars rearranging into patterns that mimicked constellations from a dozen worlds. Below them, the garden endured. Time passed in increments too small for the Confederation to notice. Days measured not by alerts or summons, but by quiet routines. The way the garden lights warmed in the morning, the steady rhythm of shared meals, the unspoken agreement that everyone watched everyone else's backs. Elias slipped into it with the same instinct that had once let him survive patrol rotations. Sierra adapted faster. She learned names, not just faces or roles, but names, speaking them carefully, committing them to memory. She helped in the gardens, her heightened senses making her strangely good at noticing when nutrient balances were off, or when a plant was stressed before it showed visible signs. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing stories of wars she hadn't fought but somehow understood. At night, she and Elias often found themselves on the upper platform again, not always talking, sometimes just sitting side by side, the distance between them shrinking by degrees neither of them acknowledged aloud. You're quieter than most humans, Sira said one evening. That's new, Elias replied. People used to accuse me of talking too much. She tilted her head. You think loudly, but you don't impose it. He considered that. War teaches you when to shut up. And when to speak. That part takes longer. She watched the artificial stars rearrange themselves overhead. On Velcara, bonding was slow. Trust was built in shared silence as much as shared blood. Elias glanced at her. That sounds intimate. It was, she said simply, and dangerous if rushed. He nodded. Humans are bad at patience. She smiled faintly. You are learning. The next morning a courier arrived. Not Confederation, independent. The message chip was small, unmarked, passed hand to hand until it reached Elias. He didn't open it immediately. Old instincts again, anything unexpected was suspect. Torres watched him, good or bad. No idea, Elias said, which usually means both. The chip contained a single data file. Velcaran registry fragment, sector archive pre-suppression. Names, locations. Legal arguments buried under redactions. Evidence that the Velcarans had been recognized, briefly, as a protected sapient culture before fear had rewritten policy. Sierra read over his shoulder, breath catching. They erased us, she whispered, but not completely. Bureaucracy's bad at clean deletions, Elias said. Someone always forgets to shred something. The file wasn't a solution, but it was leverage. The garden buzzed with quiet urgency as the information spread. Lawyers who'd abandoned official practice. Hackers who specialized in inconvenient truths. Veterans who understood how to apply pressure where it hurt. For the first time, the Confederation wasn't chasing a ghost. They were facing a paper trail. That night, Elias found Sira alone again, standing at the edge of the garden where the concrete dropped into darkness. You could leave, he said gently. Disappear. No one here would blame you. She didn't turn. I ran once, she said. It kept me alive, but it didn't give me a future. She faced him then, violet eyes steady. I don't want to survive quietly anymore. Elias felt the weight of that choice. I can't promise safety, he said. I don't need safety, she replied. I need agency. Their hands met this time deliberately. Her skin was cool, steady. So, Elias said softly, we push back. Yes, Sira said, together. Above them, the artificial star. The hearing took place in a room that had never been designed for justice. It was circular, white, and acoustically perfect. Every word calibrated to sound calm, reasonable, inevitable. No windows, no sense of time. Just a raised platform, a semicircle of officials, and a floor polished smooth enough to erase footprints as soon as they were made. Elias stood beside Sira at the center, not behind her, not in front of her, beside. That alone unsettled the panel more than any argument could have. The Confederation representative adjusted her data pad, eyes flicking briefly to the Velkaran standing in open view, unrestrained, uncontained. This session concerns the improper relocation and harboring of a classified hemophagic species. Sapient individual, Sira corrected calmly. A ripple of discomfort moved through the panel. Elias almost smiled. Whose presence in civilian space poses an unacceptable risk, the representative continued, tightening her tone. Captain Ward, your service record is exemplary. Your actions here are disappointing. Elias met her gaze without flinching. So was the war. Didn't stop you from running it. Silence followed. Then a new voice spoke, older, steadier. Let the record reflect that Velkaran representatives were never formally heard prior to classification. The panel shifted. Data streams bloomed across the air, documents, timestamps, archived accords pulled from forgotten servers. The registry fragment Elias had received was no longer alone. It had multiplied, stitched together by dozens of invisible hands working in the margins. Proof. Not emotional, not dramatic, inescapably bureaucratic. You dismantled their food systems, another voice added. You scattered their population. Then you cited resulting instability as justification for continued suppression. The representative's jaw tightened. These actions were taken for public safety. Sira stepped forward. Her voice did not rise, it did not tremble. On Velkara, she said, we believed that a civilization could be judged by how it treated those who required trust to survive. You broke that trust, not out of necessity, out of fear. The room listened. Even the systems paused, processing priorities, recalculating in ways Elias could almost feel. I will not ask you to absolve yourselves, Sira continued. I ask only that you stop deciding our fate without us present. The silence that followed was different, not resistance, consideration. At last, the lead arbiter spoke. The Velkaran classification will be suspended pending full cultural review. Relocation programs are hereby frozen. Elias exhaled. Sira's fingers tightened around his hand. This hearing is adjourned, the arbiter finished. Further action will require cooperation. Outside the chamber, the helix waited as it always did, vast, indifferent, alive. They didn't celebrate. They walked, back to the garden, back to the people who had made space when none was offered. That night, the artificial stars shifted into an unfamiliar pattern, one mapped from Velkaran records, reconstructed from memory and stubbornness. Sira stood beneath them, eyes bright. We are not whole, she said softly, but we are no longer lost. Elias leaned beside her, watching the lights. Yeah, turns out home isn't where you're assigned. She glanced at him, a small, genuine smile forming. It's where someone chooses to stand. Their hands found each other again, easy now, unremarkable, real. Below them, life continued. Above them, systems adapted. And somewhere deep in the Confederation's endless machinery, a single assumption had failed. Not with violence, not with conquest, but with the quiet, stubborn insistence that people were not mistakes to be corrected. They were choices. And this one, Elias knew with certainty. He would make again.